Welcome back. So we are going to begin a little series that I will call the End of Summer Sprint. And what that really means is I'm going to kind of run through a bunch of loaner sets, and we're going to do those kind of quickly. Maybe I'll spend a night or two with them and give you some quick impressions on them. And they're mostly older sets that I just had on my personal list and finally had a chance to listen to them. And then there are sets like this, which is kind of a special set that I bought. And this is the Akros Erasmus. So for those of you who know Tony Tex, maybe you know him as Akros, maybe you know him as Antonio. So he partnered with XINHS to have his set, his tuning, manufactured in a very professional manufacturing line, factory. And, honestly, it's sort of amazing that one guy really actually put this together. And for those of you who have followed him, you sort of know that he's done tons and tons of retunings, mods, and so he sort of had his, he earned his chops sort of by doing that. And to actually have his own tuning, burned into a set and manufactured is kind of amazing to me. I don't know if anyone else finds it so amazing, but, to have one guy partnered with a small company and had this thing manufactured, in a very professional way, it's kind of amazing. I mean, it's a very, very high quality build set, and there's kind of no doubt about that. There's no real corners cut. This is, you can actually see this is number 3, which you can almost see that's number 3. So he did a very limited run. So he partnered with XINHS to have a small number of these manufactured. And so he does have some supply of them, but I have number 3. So let's sort of jump into what it looks like on paper on the graph wise. And you can kind of see this is a very, very gentle slope. This is sort of at the more neutral setting, the green one. So it actually does have switches, which I forgot to show you. So on the back of this, we can actually see it right here. You actually see it's got a pair of dip switches. So 00 is sort of the more bassier version, and I like the 11, which is the more neutral version. So bass-wise, you're looking at about 4 dB all the way out here in the sub-bass. Very, very gentle slide into the mids. Very nice mids, and then just another gentle rise, and that's probably 5 dB or so right there in the gain area at about 2K. So very much a neutral-ish style tuning, not a whole lot of boost at either end, just very, very nice, smooth transition all the way from bass, all the way through lower treble, upper mids, and then sort of this very relaxed extension all the way through the treble. So I would call it neutral-ish. I don't really think it's really anything other than neutral-ish. It's just kind of end-to-end neutral-ish, and then this kind of rolls off kind of nicely. But yeah, that's what I would call it. Maybe you can call it a very, very shallow V, but I think that would be stretching it and probably not what his intention was. I think it's really supposed to be more of a neutral-ish set. So again, I really, really do want to congratulate my good friend Tony. He is a very good friend, and do take that into consideration with this review and what I'm going to say, because this was really meant to be a very quick overview, a teaser, an appetizer for you to actually reach out to Tony and really ask your real questions to him. This is more of a introduction. There's not that many people who have the set. I have the set, and I had the time to really talk about it, and I haven't spent a ton of time listening to it, but I think it's a little more important for people to reach out to Tony and ask him your questions. And this is more of a awareness of this. The set is out there, and you can actually reach out to Tony and grab it. So very much congratulations to my good friend Tony on that. So sound, like I said, neutral-ish, but with 2 settings, and one is just slightly more neutral than the other one. So as I said, 1 is actually a little more neutral. That is the one I prefer, and it's just a hair cleaner for me. There's not a ton of difference between them, as you saw in the graph, but I do like the 1. So some pros on the Erasmus. I think it's an amazingly coherent set for a hybrid, and of course I forgot to mention that it is a 1 dynamic driver, so you can actually see the dynamic driver there, and 2 BAs, which are kind of right there. You can almost see them. So for a hybrid set, one of the harder things to actually pull off is coherency. really having no tonal shifts between the dynamic driver and the balanced armatures. And this one actually does it sort of amazingly well. And I think it's actually tuned a little more like a dynamic driver. If you listen to it, it's really, I think the intention really was to make a very, very tight coupling between the dynamic driver and the balanced armatures. And I think that's really what he pulled off. And it really gives you this sort of natural musical, and of course it's a hybrid, but all those harsh points actually there aren't any harsh points at all. It's like I said, it's a very, very relaxed rise. There's almost, it's about 5 dB. There's going to be no shout there. Coupler, there's really no peak points here. There's no harsh points. Very, very smooth sort of from end to end. So all those harsh points long gone. And I would say it's more for mid heads than bass heads or treble heads, just because it's neutral. You're not going to find a whole lot of elevation at either side. So it is for people who are pretty serious about their mids. So on the con side, if you are a V-shaped person and you're looking for a boost on either side, I think the upper range is probably going to be a little too polite for you. It's just very relaxed and non-fatiguing and polite. You're not going to find that high energy upper range like you may be used to on your V sets. And if you key off at that point, especially if you listen to the upper range for your areas of emotion, those female vocals with lots of emotion, detail, texture, engagement, it's going to sound, neutral. You just don't have a boost in that area. And if you're used to it, it's going to come off as maybe a little boring or unengaging is how people would, I think, talk about neutral sets. And I can't really disagree with that. So do reviewers make good tuners? I think the answer is yes. And, I think the real thing is that they really get rid of all the problems. And I think Tony got rid of all the tuning problems. And what you're left with is really Tony's point of view, Tony's preferences on how he likes his bass and how he likes the mids, how he liked to execute that tuning on the set. And I think that's really what you're left with. There's no real, there's a huge peak here or it's very shouty. All those things are gone because those are the things that he would complain about in his own reviews. So you're sort of left with, the raw preferences is how I would call it. So the bass-wise, like I said, it's only about a 4 dB rise. So I think it's right in the Goldilocks zone for neutral. And I really do like the lower bass level for better mids. So this one sort of hit that tuning quite well. You almost don't notice the bass. It's so integrated in with the mids and it's so seamless of a transition. It doesn't really pop out at all. It's very not noticeable. And that's, I think, a very good thing. There's just no problem there. It's just right there supporting the mids as it should. So on the downside, it's not a slammer, not a huge bass headset, not a hard slammer, and it just wouldn't fit this tuning. So this one is definitely smooth, and it goes for that really nothing out of place sound, which I think it pulls off quite well. On the mid side, I think Tony does love mids, and these go for that balance of body and weight, but do show some BA technicalities. And I think this is, one of the hardest parts of tuning is finding that balance between that low-end body, making your male vocals have authority and body and weight, but then at the same time having the speed and the transients and all the technicalities, the detail and the resolution. Finding that balance is so difficult. And what you're listening to in Erasmus is really Tony's preference on how to balance these two things. And I would say it leans a little more towards the body and weight side and less on the BA technicalities. I think some sets, especially the ones that so this is only about 5 dB, but those hybrid sets that bump it up to about 10 dB, you can tell that they're just trying to force a little more detail, a little more resolution into the sound. So they elevate this, everything becomes a little brighter and a little off natural. And for this, I think Tony really stuck with just giving everything a nice body here, making it really smooth, and just enough of these BA detail and texture, all these things that you get from about 2 to 5K, but never really deviating from a very natural sound. So it's the tightrope that almost every set walks, and I would say that this is how Tony interprets it and what he prefers. So I think he does, perhaps choose the more weighty mids versus really pulling or really pushing the BAs to the edge. with a bit more detail and texture. Like I said, he could have certainly popped up 2 to 5K and made it, a little sharper and a little edgier, but that's probably not his preference. So you can't really complain, because this is how he likes his mids and how he executed mids on this driver set. So I think the mids are very much tuned like any of the recent great dynamic drivers. Very coherent, solid, enough technicalities, better than any dynamic driver that I've heard in the past couple years, because dynamic driver technology and development has progressed so far that the dynamic drivers from 2022 are really, really good, and they've sort of gotten to the point where some of the cheaper hybrids aren't really as effective at sound quality, and some of the recent ones, are really, really good. And I think his hybrid tends to sound just like some of these great dynamic drivers because it's so cohesive and tightly coupled with the balanced armatures, as opposed to other sets that tend to really push the balanced armature side of that and make them, very, a little harsher, a little sharper, edgier. That's just not probably a sound that he prefers. So on the treble side, again, it's this relaxed extension. It kind of starts off very relaxed, and there's a little dip here, and then the whole thing just sort of rolls off. And again, it's sort of a no peaky, non-fatiguing, nothing out of place, just a very relaxed treble. And I think maybe it's a bit too conservative for me, but for a neutral set, I do think it actually works quite well. And it's probably the part that I would change, as it, especially at lower volume, it just drops off a little fast. And at lower volume, perhaps it sounds a little dark, barely dark, as I would call it. And I found myself actually turning the volume up. And I think just my preference, but yeah, I think at higher volume, this one has sort of a larger range of where the vocals and the treble sound a little lower in volume. And then you get to this point where you're like, oh, this is just perfectly right. And I think that range is just a little higher than I was expecting it to be. But that's a super huge nitpick there, basically on my preferences. So stage-wise, it definitely has a good use of space. And again, pushing it into the upper range a bit harder would have made it sound a little bigger. It's just one of those things that happen. If you give it a little more upper range treble, give it a little more air, things tend to sound a little bigger. And I think this one would actually sound a little bigger, but probably at the expense of something else that I talked about. It definitely has the width and depth, and it probably needs a little more height, but we can't have everything. And as a first try, like I said, it's sort of amazing that he really pulled this off as well as he did. And again, this was sort of meant to be the teaser to really reach out to him. If you're interested in purchasing the set, you're going to have to contact him anyway. So while you're at it, ask him some questions, see if it fits your needs and your preferences, and do give him a shout out on that. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.